In this video, we're going to look at how to write a high-quality dissertation or thesis introduction chapter. We're going to explore the 7 essential ingredients of a strong introduction chapter, one at a time, as well as the essential things that you need to keep in mind as you craft each section. We'll also share some useful tips and tricks to help you optimize your approach. So grab a cup of coffee, grab a cup of tea, whatever works for you, and let's jump into it. Hey, welcome to Grad Coach TV, where we demystify and simplify the oftentimes seemingly bizarre world of academic research. My name is Emma, and today we're going to look at how to write a high-quality dissertation or thesis introduction chapter so that you can craft your intro with confidence. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe for more videos that can help you conquer your dissertation or thesis. Now, before we jump into it, let's quickly clarify some terminology. You'll notice that I've used the words dissertation and thesis interchangeably. While these terms do reflect different levels of research, for example, master's versus PhD level research, the introduction chapter generally contains the same 7 essential ingredients, regardless of level. So, in this video, dissertation equals thesis. With that out of the way, let's take a look at how to craft a winning dissertation introduction chapter, step by step. To craft a high-quality dissertation or thesis introduction chapter, you need to understand exactly what this chapter needs to achieve. In other words, what's its purpose? Well, as the name suggests, the introduction chapter needs to introduce the reader to your research so that they understand what you're trying to figure out or what problem you're trying to solve. More specifically, you need to answer 4 important questions in your introduction chapter. These questions are, number 1, what will you be researching? In other words, your research topic. Number 2, why is it worthwhile? So your justification. Number 3, what will the scope of your research be? So in other words, what will you cover and what won't you cover? And number 4, what will be the limitations of your research? So basically, what will the potential shortcomings be? Simply put, your dissertation's introduction chapter needs to provide an overview of your planned research as well as a clear rationale for it. This chapter has to explain both the what and the why of your research. What's it all about? And why is that important? Simple enough, right? Well, the trick is finding the appropriate depth of information. As the researcher, you're going to be extremely close to your topic, and this makes it easy to get caught up in the minor details. While these intricate details might be interesting, you need to write your introduction chapter on more of a need-to-know type basis, or it will just end up becoming way too lengthy and dense. You need to balance painting a clear picture with keeping things concise. But don't worry, you'll be able to explore all of the intricate details in later chapters. Right, now that you understand what you need to achieve from your introduction chapter, we can get into the details. While the exact requirements for this chapter can vary from university to university, there are 7 core components that most institutions will require. We call these the 7 essential ingredients. First, I'll lay the ingredients out on the table, and then we'll take a closer look at each of them. If you have any questions about any of the ingredients, just drop a comment below, and we'll do our best to help. All right, the 7 essential ingredients are as follows. Number 1, the opening section, where you'll introduce your reader to your research in high-level terms. Number 2, the background to the study, where you'll explain the context of your project. Number 3, the research problem. This is where you'll explain the gap that exists in the current research. Number 4, the research aims, objectives, and questions, where you'll clearly state what your research will aim to achieve. Number 5, the significance or justification, where you'll explain why your research is worth doing and the value it will provide to the world. Number 6, the limitations. This is where you'll acknowledge the potential limitations of your project and approach. And number 7, the structure, where you'll briefly outline the structure of your dissertation or thesis to help orient the reader. By incorporating these 7 essential ingredients into your introduction chapter, you'll comprehensively cover both the what and the why I mentioned earlier. Essentially, you'll achieve the purpose of the chapter. You can also use these 7 ingredients in this order as the structure for your chapter to ensure a smooth, logical flow. Now, this isn't essential, but generally speaking, it can help to create an engaging narrative that's easy for your reader to understand. Right, now that we've laid out these 7 ingredients, let's get cooking. The very first essential ingredient for your dissertation introduction chapter is, well, an introduction or opening section. Just like every other chapter, your introduction chapter needs to start by providing a brief overview of what you'll be covering in the chapter. This section needs to engage the reader with clear, concise language that can be easily understood and digested. If the reader, your marker, has to struggle through it, they're going to lose interest, which will make it harder for you to earn marks. Just because you're writing an academic paper doesn't mean that you can ignore the basic principles of engaging writing that's used by marketers, bloggers, and journalists. At the end of the day, you're all trying to sell an idea. Yours just happens to be a research idea. So, what goes into this opening section? Well, there's no set formula, but it is a good idea to include the following 4 foundational sentences in your opening section. Number 1, a sentence or 2 introducing the overall field of your research. For example, organizational skills development involves identifying current or potential skills gaps within a business and developing programs to resolve these gaps. Management research, including X, Y, and Z, has clearly established that organizational skills development is an essential contributor to business growth. Number 2, a sentence introducing your specific research problem. For example, however, there are conflicting views and an overall lack of research regarding how to best manage skills development initiatives in highly dynamic environments where subject knowledge is rapidly and continuously evolving. For example, in the website development industry. Number 3, a sentence stating your research aims and objectives. For example, this research aims to identify and evaluate skills development approaches and strategies for highly dynamic industries in which subject knowledge is continuously evolving. And lastly, number 4, a sentence outlining the layout of the introduction chapter. For example, this chapter will provide an introduction to the study by first discussing the background and context, followed by the research problem, the research aims, objectives, and questions, the significance, and finally, the limitations. As I mentioned, this opening section of your introduction chapter should not be lengthy. Typically, these 4 sentences should fit neatly into 1 or 2 paragraphs max. What you're aiming for here is a clear and concise introduction to your research, not a detailed explanation. Now, if some of this terminology sounds unfamiliar, don't stress it. We'll cover it in more detail later in this video. Right, with your opening section out of the way, it's time to add the next ingredient, the background to your study. So let's jump into that. Now that you've provided a high-level overview of your dissertation or thesis, it's time to go a little deeper and lay the foundation for your research topic. This foundation is what the second ingredient is all about, the background to your study. So, what is the background section all about? Well, this section of your introduction chapter should provide a broad overview of the topic area that you'll be researching, as well as the current contextual factors. This could include, for example, a brief history of the topic, recent developments in the area, important concepts and key pieces of research. In other words, in this section, you need to provide the relevant background information to give the reader a decent foundational understanding of your research area. Let's look at an example to make this a little more concrete. If we stick with the skills development topic I mentioned earlier, the background section would start by providing an overview of what organizational skills development is and outline the key existing research regarding development approaches. Then it would go on to discuss how the modern day context has created a new challenge for traditional skills development strategies and approaches. Specifically, that in many industries, technical knowledge is constantly and rapidly evolving, and traditional education providers struggle to keep up with the new pace of technologies. Importantly, you need to write this section with the assumption that the reader is not an expert in your topic area. So, if there are industry-specific jargon and complex terminology, you should briefly explain that here so the reader can understand the rest of your document. Don't make assumptions about the reader's knowledge. In most cases, your markers won't be able to ask you questions if they don't understand something. So always err on the safe side and explain anything that's not common knowledge. Right. With your background and context laid out, the next step is to articulate what's missing from the current body of skills development research. In other words, the research problem, which is ingredient number 3. So let's dive into it. Now that you've given your reader an overview of your research area, it's time to get specific about the research problem that you'll address in your dissertation or thesis. While the background section would have alluded to a potential research problem or even multiple research problems, the purpose of this section is to narrow the focus and highlight the specific research problem you'll address. But what exactly is a research problem, you ask? Well, a research problem can be any issue or question for which there isn't already a well-established and agreed-upon answer in the existing research. In other words, a research problem exists when there's a need to answer a question or set of questions, but there's a gap in the existing literature, or the existing research is conflicting or inconsistent. So, to present your research problem, you need to make it clear what exactly is missing in the current literature and why this is a problem. It's usually a good idea to structure this discussion into 3 sections. Specifically, number 1, what's already well established in the literature. In other words, what's widely agreed upon by researchers. Number 2, what's missing in the literature. So where's the literature gap? And 3, why this is a problem. So why it's important to fill this gap. Let's look at an example of this structure using the skills development topic. Organizational skills development is critically important for employee satisfaction and company performance. Reference. Numerous studies have investigated strategies and approaches to manage skills development programs within organizations. Reference. This paragraph explains what's already well established in the literature. However, these studies have traditionally focused on relatively slow-paced industries where key skills and knowledge do not change particularly often. This body of theory presents a problem for industries that face a rapidly changing skills landscape. For example, the website development industry, where new platforms, languages, and best practices emerge on extremely frequent basis. This paragraph explains what's missing from the literature. As a result, the existing research is inadequate for industries in which essential knowledge and skills are constantly and rapidly evolving, as it assumes a slow pace of knowledge development. Industries in such environments, therefore, find themselves ill-equipped in terms of skills development strategies and approaches. This paragraph explains why the research gap is problematic. As you can see in this example, in a few lines, we've explained Number 1, the current state of research. Number 2, the literature gap. And number 3, why that gap is a problem. By doing this, the research problem is made crystal clear, which lays the foundation for your own research. So with the research problem clearly articulated, the next step is to state what you're going to do about it. In other words, what your research aims, objectives, and questions will be, which is ingredient number 4. Let's jump into it. Now that you've clearly identified your research problem, it's time to identify your research aims and objectives, as well as your research questions. In other words, it's time to explain what you're going to do about the research problem. So what do you need to do here? Well, the starting point is to clearly state your research aim, or aims. The research aim is the main goal, or the overarching purpose of your dissertation or thesis. It's a high-level statement of what you're aiming to achieve. Let's look at an example, sticking with the skills development topic. Given the lack of research regarding organizational skills development in fast-moving industries, this study will aim to identify and evaluate the skills development approaches utilized by web development companies in the UK. As you can see in this example, the research aim is clearly outlined, as well as the specific context in which the research will be undertaken. In other words, the web development industry in the UK. Next up is the research objective, or objectives. While the research aims cover the high-level what, the research objectives are a bit more practically oriented, looking at the specific things you'll be doing to achieve those research aims. Let's take a look at an example of some research objectives to fit the research aim. Objective number 1, to identify common skills development strategies and approaches utilized by web development companies in the UK. Objective number 2, to evaluate the effectiveness of these strategies and approaches. And objective number 3, to compare and contrast these strategies and approaches in terms of their strengths and weaknesses. As you can see from this example, these objectives describe the specific actions you'll take and things you'll investigate in order to achieve your research aims. In other words, they break down the research aims into more specific, actionable objectives. The final step is to state your research questions. Your research questions brings the aims and objectives another level down to earth. These are the specific questions that your dissertation or thesis will seek to answer. They're not fluffy, ambiguous, or conceptual. They're very specific, and you'll need to directly answer them in your conclusions chapter. The research questions typically relate directly to the research objectives and sometimes can even look a bit too obvious, but they're still extremely important. Let's take a look at an example of the research questions that would flow from the research objectives I mentioned earlier. Research question number 1. What skills development strategies and approaches are currently being used by web development companies in the UK? Research question number 2. How effective are each of these strategies and approaches? Research question number 3. What are the strengths and the weaknesses of each of these strategies and approaches? As you can see, the research questions mimic the research objectives, but they are presented in question format. These questions will act as the driving force throughout your dissertation or thesis, from the literature review to the methodology and onward. So they're really important. If you want to learn more about research questions, be sure to check out our detailed post on the Grad Coach blog. I'll include a link below this video. A final note about this section, it's really important to be clear about the scope of your study. In other words, what will you cover and what won't you cover? If your research aims and objectives and questions are too broad, you'll risk losing focus or investigating a problem which is too big to solve within a single dissertation. So you need to establish clear boundaries in this section of your introduction chapter. You can do this, for example, by limiting it to a specific industry, country, or time period. That way, you'll ring-fence your research, which will allow you to investigate your topic deeply and thoroughly, which is what earns marks. Right. right, now that you've laid out your research aims, objectives, and research questions, it's time to move on to the next ingredient. Let's do it. Now that you've made it clear what you'll be researching, it's time to make a strong argument regarding your study's importance and significance. So basically, now that you've covered the what, it's time to cover the why. But hold on, didn't we already discuss this in the earlier sections? Well, yeah, kinda. By this stage, you've already briefly alluded to the importance of your study in your background and research problem sections. But you haven't explicitly stated how your research findings will benefit the world. So now's your chance to clearly state how your study will benefit either industry, academia, or ideally both. In other words, you need to explain how your research will make a difference and what implications it will have. Let's take a look at an example. This study will contribute to the body of knowledge on skills development by surfacing and evaluating skills development strategies and approaches for industries in which knowledge and skills are rapidly and constantly changing. This will help address the current shortage of research in this area and provide real-world value to organizations operating in such dynamic environments. As you can see in this example, the paragraph clearly explains how the research will help fill a gap in the literature and also provide practical value to organizations. The section doesn't need to be particularly lengthy, but it does need to be convincing. You need to sell the value of your research here so that the reader understands why it's worth committing an entire dissertation or thesis to it. This section needs to be the salesman of your research. So spend some time thinking about the ways in which your research will make a unique contribution to the world and how the knowledge you create could benefit both academia and the industry. Then go on and sell it in this section. Once you've done that, it's time to move on to the sixth essential ingredient of the dissertation introduction, the limitations. Now that you've sold your research to the reader and hopefully got them excited about what's coming up in the rest of your dissertation, it's time to briefly discuss the potential limitations of your research. Now, you're probably thinking, hold up, what limitations? My research is well thought out and carefully designed. Why would there be limitations? Well, sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but no piece of research is perfect. This is especially true for a dissertation or thesis, which typically has a very tight or zero budget, tight time constraints, and limited researcher experience. Generally, your dissertation will be the first or maybe second formal academic research project you've ever undertaken, so it's unlikely to win any research awards. Simply put, your research will invariably have limitations, but don't stress yourself out. This is completely acceptable and expected. Even professional research has limitations. As I said, no piece of research is perfect. The key is to recognize the limitations up front and be completely transparent about them so that future researchers are aware of them and can improve the study's design to minimize the limitation and strengthen the findings. So, long story short, your limitations section should show that you've thought about the ways in which your study is limited. Generally, you'll want to consider at least the following 4 common limitations. These are: number 1, your scope. For example, perhaps your focus is very narrow and doesn't consider how certain variables interact with each other. Number 2, your research methodology. For example, a qualitative methodology could be criticized for being overly subjective, or a quantitative methodology could be criticized for oversimplifying the situation. Number 3, your resources. For example, a lack of time, money, equipment, and/or your own research experience. Number 4, the generalizability of your findings. For example, the findings from a study of a specific industry or country can't necessarily be generalized to other industries or countries. Don't be shy here. There's no use trying to hide the limitations or weaknesses of your research. In fact, the more critical you can be of your study, the better. The markers want to see that you are aware of the limitations, as this demonstrates your understanding of academic research. So, be brutal. Right, once you've clearly communicated the limitations of your dissertation or thesis, it's time to mix in the final introduction ingredient, which is the structural outline. Let's get to that. Now that you've clearly communicated what your research is going to be about, why it's important, and what the limitations will likely be, the final ingredient is the structural outline. The purpose of this section is simply to provide your reader with a roadmap of what to expect in terms of the structure of your dissertation or thesis. In this section, you'll need to provide a brief summary of each chapter's purpose and contents, including the introduction chapter. A sentence or two explaining what you'll do in each chapter is generally enough to orient the reader. You don't want to get too detailed here. It's purely an outline, not a summary of your research. Let's look at an example to make this a little more tangible. In Chapter 1, the context of the study has been introduced. The research objectives and questions have been identified, and the value of such research argued. The limitations of the study have also been discussed. In Chapter 2, the existing literature will be reviewed to identify key skills development approaches and strategies within the context of fast-moving industries, especially technology-intensive industries. In Chapter 3, the theoretical framework will be presented. The adoption of a qualitative, inductive research approach will be justified, and the broader research design will be discussed, including the limitations thereof. So as you can see from the example, this section is simply an outline of the chapter structure, allocating a short paragraph to each chapter. Done correctly, the outline will help your reader understand what to expect and reassure them that you'll address the multiple facets of the study. By the way, if you're unsure of how to structure your dissertation or thesis, be sure to check out our video, which explains dissertation structure from start to end. I'll include the link below. All right, so that covers the 7 essential ingredients of a high-quality dissertation or thesis introduction chapter. I've thrown a lot at you in this video, so let's quickly recap on the most important bits. The 7 essential ingredients of a winning dissertation introduction chapter are: 1, the opening section, where you give a brief, high-level overview of what your research will be about. 2, the study background, where you introduce the reader to the key theory, concepts, and terminology, as well as the context of your study. 3, the research problem, where you explain what the problem with the current research is. In other words, the research gap. 4, the research aims, objectives, and questions, where you clearly state what your dissertation will investigate. 5, the significance, where you explain what value your research will provide to the world. 6, the limitations, where you explain what the potential shortcomings of your research may be. And finally, 7, the structural outline, where you provide a high-level overview of the structure of your document. If you bake these 7 ingredients into your dissertation introduction chapter, you'll be well on your way to building an engaging introduction chapter that lays a rock-solid foundation for the rest of your document. Remember, while we've covered the essential ingredients here, there may be some additional components that your university requires, so be sure to double-check your project brief. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button and leave a comment if you have any questions. If you're in the process of writing your dissertation, be sure to subscribe to the Grad Coach channel for more research-related content. Lastly, if you need a helping hand with your research, check out our private coaching service, where we work with you on a one-on-one basis, chapter by chapter, to ensure that you craft a winning dissertation. If that sounds interesting to you, book a free consultation with a friendly coach at www.gradcoach.com. As always, I'll include a link below. And that's all for this episode of Grad Coach TV. Until next time, good luck!